Right, hello everyone. Hello everybody. Today I would like to talk about the Irish question or the Irish problem. What is the Irish problem? Straight off the bat, essentially the Irish problem is the problem of the ongoing 1,000-year long conflict between the English and the Irish, or the English and the Gaelic race, because technically Scotland is also Irish because they're also Gaelic, more or less. So it's the history of this ongoing conflict, which has been going on for roughly 1,000 years, perhaps longer, arguably, and it is a history which has, in my opinion, been largely ignored by ethno-nationalists in England. And also by, to a great extent, also by civic nationalists, because these days civic nationalists are just concerned with other subject matters like mass immigration. Northern Ireland seems to have been forgotten, and although there is a feeling that, Scotland, they're all a bunch of communists. So actually, funny enough, maybe even the civic nationalists do discuss the Irish problem more than the ethno-nationalists, funny enough. But my main concern is with the ethno-nationalists, who appear to have just completely ignored this subject matter, because English ethno-nationalists are entirely concerned with Germany. They are devoted to Germany. They wish that they were German. They wish that Germany had won the Second World War, and they praise Germany as the heartland of Europe. And Jonathan Bowden himself said Germany is the heart of Europe. Okay, so your Morgoths, your Millennial Woes, your Mark Collett, your Laura Towler, your Way of the World, your Horus, all of these, your Nick Griffin, all of these people they're Germanophiles. They love the Germans. They for whatever reason, I don't know. Well, I know the reasons. They don't seem to be absorbed or interested too much in English history. They are constantly thinking about the Germans, and so they don't consider English history. They don't go into it. They don't think about it. And when the Irish question pops up, generally speaking, they'll just completely betray the people of Northern Ireland, who are English and who are very loyal to this country, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we should have an Irish ethno state, right? We should have an Irish ethno state. Never mind the people of Northern Ireland who are loyal to England. No, just completely throw them under the bus. We should have an Irish ethno state." Sometimes they're even in favour of Scotland breaking away and forming its own nation, or even Welsh nationalism. So they are disloyal, essentially, to England. They are disloyal to the interests of this our country, our people, because it's not in our interest to have an independent Scotland or an independent Wales, or even it's obviously not in our interest to desert our people in Northern Ireland. It's not in our interest to have an independent Scotland, firstly, because I don't want a French army sitting up there, or a Chinese army, or a Muslim army, or whatever. Like one of the reasons why our island is so secure is because it's an island, right? So we have a natural barrier, and any kind of naval invasion in the modern age is very, very difficult. It's a lot easier in medieval times. That's why they got away with 1066, I guess, because there was less of a dense population, and so you could just land on a beach anywhere and just roll up. But in the modern age, a naval invasion is very, very difficult, almost impossible. D-Day was a fluke in many ways. We got lucky with that one. And so, as a matter of national security, we do not want to be a divided island. We do not want an independent Scotland or an independent Wales, and we really don't want an independent Ireland either. I mean, we have half of it, but we don't want to get caught in a crossfire between, we don't want to get caught in a pincer movement with the Irish on one hand, France on the other hand, and we're just getting bombed by both sides. Do you see what I mean? So really, it's if we just put all the mythology and the history to one side and we just think about it from a pragmatic military point of view, which we should do, it is in our interests to have a united kingdom, which means England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales together, one country. It is in our military interest to be a unionist. But ethno-nationalists will not say this. Generally speaking, they'll side with the Irish. And generally speaking also, they like to ignore the various different ethnicities within Europe, and they like to pretend that we're all the same. We're all just white. Okay, we're all just white. It's the white race, and we have to save the white race, and it's okay to be white, and white lives matter, and etc., etc. Now, I don't actually really have a problem with this per se. I don't think it's wrong to care about the white race. I am white. If I went to Africa, people would say, oh, look at the white guy, right? If you go to Brazil, they call you a gringo. It doesn't really matter what country you come from. If you go to China, they'll call you a white pig, right? If you go to India, they'll call you a Videshi. So I am white, and white is just another word for European. I mean, you can quibble about it and say the Japanese are white, but I mean, everybody knows white just means European, right? Everybody knows E. Michael Jones is doing all these mental gymnastics in his head trying to say that white people don't exist. It's just nonsense. Everybody knows European people exist, okay? And European people are white, more or less. So I don't have a problem with saying that I'm white or it's okay to be white. In a broad sense, you know, white nations should be protected. However, the thing is that within Europe there are many different ethnicities and nationalities, and they're clashing with each other, and they have a long history of clashing with each other, and this history cannot be ignored. Firstly, Europe is not, well, you could argue the European Union is politically united, but not really. Not really. I mean, it loosely kind of is, but not really. It's not really a nation, is it? It's not the European nation. But in this country, obviously, we had Brexit, so we're not politically united. The white nations of the world are not politically one, so it doesn't really make sense for us to pretend that they are. You have different nations within the white nations of this world, and they have their power struggles with each other, and these things exist and they cannot be ignored. If you ignore them, then you're just not going to recognize what's really going on in the world. So you can't just whiten everything. You can't just paint over all the different ethnicities of Europe and just pretend they're all the same. We're all just white together. I mean, I get the meme, no more brother wars. Let's fight against the whole world instead of fighting against ourselves. Yeah, sure, I'm 100%. However, push comes to shove, I'll stick up for my country above all the others, whether they're French or Brazilian or American or Irish or whatever. And you have to take that stand, and you have to stick up for your country first. Otherwise, other countries will just take advantage of you. And that's exactly what's going on within the white ethno-nationalist movement in England. Essentially, you just have other groups of people guilt-tripping England for winning the Second World War. Right? We're in this incredibly cucked position where you have Americans, a lot of them who have Irish ancestry, so they got a chip on their shoulder about the English. They don't like us, okay? And they're on the internet, and they're giving donations to Millennial Woes, to Morgoth, to Mark Collett, to all these people, the leaders of English ethno-nationalism. They're giving donations to them, and they're pushing an anti-English narrative of England is bad because England won the Second World War, and England did Dresden, and Dresden was the worst thing that ever happened. I mean, it's basically the Nazi narrative in reverse, right? In the mainstream, Hitler is bad, and the Holocaust is the worst thing that ever happened. In ethno-nationalist circles, Churchill is bad, and Dresden is the worst thing that ever happened ever. And it's just plainly stupid on the face of it, because the fact of the matter is, as I've said a million times before, nobody wanted that war to happen. Nobody wanted the war. The war only happened because Hitler started invading countries in the middle of Europe. And that's it. If he would have been peaceful, if he had simply stayed in Germany, then what would have happened? Well, there would have been no war. Do you think Churchill was going to raise an army and invade Germany? Like, it wouldn't have happened. But nonetheless, English ethno-nationalists in this country have submitted themselves to a lot of Americans with Irish ancestry who have a chip on their shoulder, and they've taken up an anti-English narrative, and this is it's pro-white and it's anti-English, and this is what happens if you don't stick up for your country first. And part of this whole puzzle is the Irish question, because as I just said, a lot of Irish in America, and they don't like the English, right? Case in point, this new vice president, what is his name? V.D. Lang, whatever. He's a hillbilly, okay? And I've just learnt this recently. The hillbillies are from the Appalachian Mountains, and a billy is a reference to William of Orange. So essentially the immigrants that moved to the Appalachian Mountains were from Northern Ireland and from Scotland, and so they were supporters of William of Orange. They were Protestants, funnily enough. So they're kind of like, it's kind of funny, ironically weird and funny, because they, obviously William ended up being our king, so it doesn't really make much sense. But nonetheless, they have this Irish kind of background and a chip on their shoulder, which is carried across. And so you see the vice president, he's standing up and he's saying, England is a Muslim country, right? And he's laughing at us. And he's, again, it's interesting actually to see the reaction on social media. Because you see a lot of English patriots, going along with it, saying, yeah, you're right, mate. But he wasn't saying it from a place of love. It's not wrong. England has been conquered by Islam. But he wasn't saying it like, we have to fix this sort of thing. It's more of this like sneering kind of, the English, they deserve everything they get kind of attitude. Right? I've seen a similar attitude from a guy called Cultured Thug. I put the clip on the internet a long time ago. It's long since been deleted. But I remember that guy. I don't even know if he's still around, but he used to be quite famous at one point. Cultured Thug, American neo-Nazi, slightly mixed heritage, like Italian heritage or something. And he did a live stream, and the subject matter of Rotherham popped up. And his response was, well, the English, they deserve everything they get. Fuck those little white working class girls getting screwed by Pakistani men. Ha ha ha, who cares? Right? That's a dark mood coming out of America. Right? I've seen a similar guy. The this YouTube channel which I started watching recently. What If Old Hist? Young guy, Zoomer, very intelligent, read a lot of books, made some great videos, and he goes on Twitter and he's like, the English. Like, who do these Europeans think they are? They think they're better than us. We're American. We rule the world now. So it's partly it's American daddy issues. But there's a chip on the shoulder of every American, okay, and that in itself is mixed with Irishness, because a lot of the Irish, obviously, they moved to America, and obviously the American Revolution itself was in many ways sponsored by the Irish. I've been talking about this recently, and somebody sent me they did some research, and I don't have it here, I haven't prepared it, but they did some research to the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, and like 27 of them were Irish, right, out of 50. So a lot of Irish, a lot of Welsh, a lot of Freemasons. Obviously, I'm not saying they were all Irish, but there was a strong influence there. We know that you have the Sons of Liberty, which was essentially like an Irish terrorist group, which was partly responsible for the Boston Tea Party, right? Boston, famous Irish city, And what did they do? They were complaining about the English, complaining about taxes, and they started throwing the tea into the harbour. So, arguably, the American Revolution started with an Irish Revolution. Like, that was the flashpoint. So, as I've said for a long time, America itself as a nation is a nation without a history, or it's a nation that is in denial of its own history, because it's like Alex Jones says, 1776, the solution to 1984 is 1776, right? That's what he keeps saying. This is the point. This is the moment for the Americans. We had a revolution. Our nation is a revolutionary nation. And even when they talk about the history that came before that, they place the emphasis on the Mayflower, which was the Puritans coming over, right, looking for religious freedom, supposedly. Okay, so America is a nation of Puritan religious freedom, etc., etc. When the real truth is that the first successful colony was Jamestown, which was established by King James, which, funny enough, was a Scottish king that we accepted as our king. But anyway, they don't want to say that America, like the first successful colony, was established by an English king. No, it has to be it has to be the Mayflower. The emphasis has to be on that. And then they're all aware, obviously, that America is an English colony and that their language and their history is rooted in our language and our history. But they're so keen to celebrate their revolution that the nation itself has basically become like a year zero state. Like it's almost like the Chinese, it's just like, it was a fresh start. So they're disconnected from their ancestors. They're disconnected from their ancestral homeland and from their people. Like, how many Americans look at the old English kings like Henry VIII or whatever, or Edward Longshanks? How many look at those kings as being their kings, the kings of their ancestors? Most of them don't. And how many look back even further than that to King Arthur or Brutus of Troy or Hengist and Horsa or the mythological foundations of England? They don't. And because they don't, they are separated from their roots, and so they are like a ship at sea without a rudder. They're just being blown this way and that. And so then when some Jew comes along and says, America is a melting pot, America is a nation of immigrants, what can they say? What can they say to push back at this? Because they've already divided themselves and separated themselves from their history and from their ancestors. And so essentially they are a revolutionary nation. They are a nation with daddy issues. They are a nation that celebrates overthrowing the establishment, etc., etc. So they're very, very wide open and vulnerable to cultural Marxist influence and to mass immigration, to all of these things. And they've been overwhelmed by these things, and now they're spreading that poison all across the whole world. This makes me sound very anti-American. I'm not. I think, man, America is one of the greatest conundrums and stories of the modern age. It is the story. It rules the world. It is a massively powerful nation. It has transformed everything. And it is my colony. The Americans don't like to hear it, but I look at it as being my colony, my responsibility. So, like every Englishman, I think every Englishman has a love-hate relationship with America, right? And that's how I feel about it. But nonetheless, the point, my dear friends, that I'm making is that there is an anti-Englishness which is baked into the cake in American nationalism and American patriotism. And you can talk to any Yankee, right? And you scratch a little bit under the surface and it's, whoa, the red coats and 1776, right? And by the way, English ethno-nationalists, again, will never point this out. You'll never hear Morgoth saying this. You'll never hear Millennial World. Well, he's Scottish anyway, but you'll never hear these people saying this stuff, right? Because they don't want to push back against people that are giving them money, essentially, on Substack, right? So this is the utterly cucked and broken state of English ethno-nationalism, basically. It's Englishmen getting bullied by Americans into feeling bad about winning the Second World War. And also we have to feel bad about the British Empire as well, for some reason, because that's bad, right? Because it's English. I mean, that's a different subject matter. That's to do with Germany and, you know, Turkey or the Ottoman Empire. Both of these two groups of people were very anti-imperialism. Lenin was anti-imperialist. There's a socialist narrative to being anti-imperialist. Obviously, England was the great imperialist nation, and a lot of ethno-nationalists are socialists, and so they're anti-imperialist, and so they're anti-British Empire. The majority of ethno-nationalists are national socialists, so again, anti-imperialist, anti-British Empire. And a lot of ethno-nationalists sympathize with Muslims, and so essentially they kind of sympathize with the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, there was a relationship between the Ottomans and the Germans in the First World War. They were allies, and so there's the old German-Muslim alliance, the old National Socialist Muslim alliance. We've seen this a lot with the recent Gaza protests, Nick Griffin hanging out with Muslims, and obviously Muslims don't like British imperialism. So again, anti-British imperialism, anti-British Empire. They have an anti-Old World Order, essentially, because America is the New World Order. America's the New World Order. We're living in the New World Order. Alex Jones says he's fighting against the New World Order and he's fighting against the Freemasons. It doesn't make any sense at all, because America was founded by Freemasons. America is the New World. And the Old World Order was taken down. The Old World Order was the British Empire. And it was much, much better than the American Empire. The British Empire did not spread transgenderism all across the world. It was a good empire. Will English ethno-nationalists celebrate this? No. They won't. They're just crawling around on their knees saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm proud to be white. I'm ashamed to be English." And it's utterly pathetic. And I'm just genuinely quite shocked that people are still going along with it in 2024. But anyway, let's try to come back to the Irish question here. I was just trying to outline the fact that English ethno-nationalism is cucked, it's anti-English, it's pro-white and it's anti-English, and there are divisions and rivalries between different ethnicities in this world, and different white ethnicities, and if you ignore these things, then you will be conquered by these things. If you pretend that there's no such thing as an English race, which is independent of the white race, then you won't be fighting to protect and defend the English race, and so you'll end up getting guilt tripped by a bunch of American Irish people telling you how bad Churchill was and how evil the British Empire was, and etc., etc. And that's the state into which we have fallen. And by the way, like, I don't want to be too, like, I don't know, megalomaniac or messianic. Like, I don't want to lean too much into my own messianic delusions here, but this is really the key to saving the world. Okay, it really, really is the key to flip this thing and to create a real, proper English ethno-nationalism. Because it is only by creating a proper English ethno-nationalism that we can unite the Anglosphere. And what I mean by that is England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and ultimately America, of which a vast majority of the whites there, or at least half, have an English ancestry. And even if they don't, they're still mixed with the English blood, and they're still living in a country which was built by the English. So the Anglosphere and the Anglo race, the English race, is the dominant ethnicity on this world. It still is to this day. It's certainly the dominant white ethnicity. There's more English people in this world than there are French or Russian or German or Spanish or anything else. I mean, actually, to be fair, Spanish, God knows how many are in Latin America, but they don't have the power that we have. They don't have America. America rules the world. So the English race is the dominant white ethnicity on this world. Will you ever hear English ethno-nationalists celebrating this? No, you won't. Only me and a bunch of random accounts on Twitter, small accounts on Twitter, you know. But it is my opinion that we have to turn things around. We have to celebrate an English ethno-nationalism, and we have to do this in order to unite the Anglosphere, and we have to unite the Anglosphere in order to save the white race, essentially. I mean, the whole of Europe is living under American rule, and the only group of people in this world that can get America back on track is us, the English, because we created them. We're the daddy. We are the homeland. And they've got daddy issues, and we need to come along and we need to say, look, guys, you're English. Stop listening to the Israeli lobby and start listening to us. We care about you. So, a big project, I know, but nonetheless, it has to be done. But let's come back to the Irish question here. What I'm trying to say is that there has been an ongoing 1,000-year-long, maybe even a 1,500-year-long conflict between the English and the Irish, and it's gone mostly unrecognized, and it has caused incredible devastation, incredible problems for us. And it's been, I say the civic nationalists recognize it a little bit, but actually, really, I don't think they do. I don't think anybody really recognizes it, to be honest with you. But it's screwed us over. We have been screwed over by this in 3 ways. First of all, as I just said, the American Revolution. Okay. Pushed forward by the Irish, celebrated by Whigs in Parliament. I looked this up the other day. Hang on. Yeah. William Petty was the Prime Minister who gave away America. Now, he wasn't the Prime Minister that was Prime Minister during most of the American Revolutionary War, but right at the end, for the few months when the contract was signed and the deal was done, America was given away by an Irishman. An Anglo-Irishman, but an Irishman nonetheless. Okay? The new capitalist England that emerged out of the American Revolution was driven forward by Gaelic thinkers. Adam Smith, Scottish. Okay? He was pro-American Revolution. All the laissez-faire and blah, blah, blah. He's the father of capitalism. He wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. He was Scottish. He supported the American Revolution. And Edmund Burke. Okay? The father of conservatism. He wrote the Reflections on the Revolution in France. He wrote it in reaction to the French Revolution, and he was against the French Revolution. He was a Whig. People were shocked because he turned against the French Revolution when everybody else was celebrating it. And he wrote this book. This book has become the cornerstone of what is now known as the conservative movement. Okay, Peter Hitchens describes himself as a Burkean conservative. So the Conservative Party actually was later formed with Robert Peel and the Tamworth Manifesto, I think, later on in the 19th century. But it has its roots really in Edmund Burke, who was a Whig and an Irishman, an Anglo-Irishman and a Protestant, true, but nonetheless an Irishman, grew up in Ireland and sympathised with the Irish and sympathised with the American Revolution. So, is it fair to say that we lost our colony, America, because of the Irish? Yes, definitely. I'm not blaming it entirely on them, but they were definitely a factor. Partly the Irish, partly the Freemasons, partly probably the Jews, right? So that's the first giant. I mean, there's a long history of interference. This video is too small to go through the entirety of Irish English history. I'm just trying to give a broad overview. American Revolution. The Irish screwed us over. Next, Ireland is next you have various different struggles in Ireland, which leads to the Act of Union in 1800. Is to establish the Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. So essentially the Irish Parliament is closed down. The Irish Prime Ministers come over to England. This causes a century of disagreements and arguments, which culminates finally in the basically David Lloyd George, Liberal Prime Minister. He was Welsh. He wasn't Irish, he was Welsh. But he was in favour of Welsh devolution. He actually basically established the welfare state. Last Liberal Prime Minister, as far as I understand it. Don't quote me on that, because I'm still quite sketchy on on the different prime ministers and who they are and what happened. But I mean, English politics is very interesting and convoluted. I mean, essentially, you have the English Civil War, you have the Roundheads versus the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers transform into the Tories, and the Tories transform into the Conservative Party. The Roundheads, on the other hand, they kind of turn into the Whigs, and then the Whigs turn into the Liberals, and then the Liberals turn into the Labour Party, right? Over a course of 3 centuries. So it's a very convoluted story. But anyway, the point being, David Lloyd George was Welsh, and he gave away Ireland. Okay, the Irish stabbed us right in the back with their revolution in the middle of the First World War. Like, we're getting the shit kicked out of us by the Germans, and the Irish have a revolution, and we sent in the Black and Tans to sort things out, but things kept rolling on, and in the end, David Lloyd George gave Ireland away. After 1,000 years, almost 1,000 years of conquest. And it was given away by a Welshman. So, point being, you may say, well, he's Welsh, he's not Irish. Well, okay, look, my argument is that on the British Isles, there are 3 ethnicities. There are 3 white ethnicities. Okay, a Germanic ethnicity, which is the Anglo-Saxon, and the Norman. The Normans were obviously originally Scandinavian. They came down, they settled in Normandy, converted to Christianity, and they were sponsored by the Jews down in Venice to invade our country. Okay, and William the Conqueror brought the Jews over with him, and they brought all kinds of people over from France, but nonetheless they were basically Germanic, right? And obviously, yes, I am well aware that the history of England really is the ongoing struggle between the English and the Norman, the Norman yoke, right? The Norman tyranny. They plunged us into slavery. We've been trying to drag ourselves out ever since. But I don't know, man. It's like a rebellion sandwich or something like this. So, on the one hand, the original people that lived in England were the British, or the Britons, who were Welsh. We call them the Welsh now. So we came over, conquered them, right? And so we essentially squashed them. So they've been rebelling against us. And then we got conquered by the Normans, and we've been rebelling against the Normans. So the Englishman is kind of like squashed in the middle somehow, right? It's like a rebellion sandwich, an English sandwich or something, like a 3-layer. I don't know, man. Something like that. But point being, there are basically 3 ethnicities. Okay, so, I mean, it depends which way you want to look at it. I guess I'm presenting 2 ways here of looking at it. This is why it's getting a little bit confusing. You could look at it in point of view of revolution, in that you've got the Celts at the bottom, the Anglo-Saxons in the middle, and the Normans at the top. Right? The Celts would be the Irish and the Welsh. They get lumped together and they get called Celtic. I don't really like the term Celtic, but everybody uses it, so I keep using it. And I don't like the term Celtic because the Irish people and the Welsh people, they had a different language and they have a different history. The Welsh, or the Britons, they are the descendants of Bruce of Troy, who originally came from well, Troy. He was a Trojan, right? So they're originally Greek, basically. That's their mythological history. The Irish, they come from somewhere else. They are the descendants of Goidel Glass, who was the son of Princess Scotia, who was a daughter of the Pharaoh. So Goidel Glass created the Gaelic language after the fall of the Tower of Babylon. In this is all described in the Bible. The Tower of Babylon is destroyed. All the languages get mixed up, and so he creates the Gaelic language. And these are the people that ended up conquering Ireland, and they became the Gaelic people, the Irish people. So totally different mythological background, totally different language, but they get thrown together and they both get called Celtic. It doesn't really make much sense to me. It's just nah. But to be fair, they both had druids, so you could call them druidic culture, and they share that with the Gauls in France, because you all know Asterix and Obelix, right? Do people still read Asterix and Obelix? I don't see this in bookshops anymore. I don't know. I read Asterix and Obelix when I was a kid. It was great. People should read that. But we all know what's the name of the druid in Asterix and Obelix? Hang on. Right, just look that up. Get a Fix. Get a Fix. That's a good one. Is the name of the druid in Asterix and Obelix. Anyway, look, point being, Celtic, I don't really like it. Better to call it druidic. Because the Welsh had druids, the Irish had druids, they had sickles, and they liked to do magic in cauldrons and things like this, and they believed in fairies. So, I mean, there is some similarity. But anyway, point being, okay, one way of looking at the white ethnic makeup of England is to say that you've got the Celtic people at the bottom, who were conquered by the evil Anglo-Saxons. Now, the Anglo-Saxons, of course, we're the English, and we are the descendants of Hengist and Horsa, who are the descendants of Woden. And we came from Denmark. Okay? So, the Angles, the Jutes, and the Saxons. And obviously, Woden himself is Odin, and he was an ancient king who has now been mythologized, right? But there is an island in Denmark called Odin's Island, essentially. You can go look it up on a map, right? Go Google that. But that's where Woden came from. That is our ancestral homeland. So we have our roots in Norse mythology, essentially. That's our culture. So what has happened is you have this original kind of Briton culture. The Britons get conquered by the English, and then the English get conquered by the Normans. So the Celts are pissed off about us because we conquered them, and we're pissed off about the Normans because they conquered us. And we've been striving for freedom from the Normans by Magna Carta and getting back the English Parliament, which is a return to the Witan of Anglo-Saxon times, of Alfred the Great, etc., etc. Like we want our Anglo-Saxon liberty back, but at the same time we're fighting for our Anglo-Saxon liberty. There's a Celt kind of like in the background somewhere who's kind of upset about his liberty being taken away by the evil English. Do you see what I mean? So it's a weird mixture that we've got on this island. So that's one way to look at it, the English sandwich. Okay. Another way to look at it is just to say there are three basic ethnicities, which is the Gaelic people, the Britons, and the Anglo-Saxons. And I would throw the Normans in with the Anglo-Saxons because they're basically Germanic, right? Yeah, that's it. These are the three ethnicities. And so we've been clashing and conflicting with each other for 1,000 years. And unless you grapple with this history and try to understand it, you're not going to understand your country, and you're not going to understand what's really going on, right? So all of this, just to bring it all the way back again to what I was saying about the way the Irish have screwed us over. Basically, I've got 3 points. The American Revolution was like one big blow. We lost our colony because of the American Revolution, because of the Irish. And then we lost Ireland itself because of a Welshman. Okay, because he was a Celt, and because he has this, I guess the Irish and the Welsh, they have this group victim culture. I actually always got on with Welsh people. I like them. I don't think they've got as much of a chip on their shoulder as the Irish have. They definitely have some of a chip on their shoulder, but it's not as big and it's not as bad. But nonetheless, a Welshman gave Ireland away. A Welshman got into Parliament, gave Ireland away, right? And then what happened after that? Well, first of all, you got the establishment of the Labour Party, which has destroyed everything in this country. Okay, and who established the Labour Party? Who's Keir Hardie, right? Our current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is named after Keir Hardie. Keir Hardie was a Scot. And you got Ramsay MacDonald, who was a Scottish bastard, interesting enough. Didn't know who his father was. And Ramsay MacDonald was the first Labour Prime Minister. I mean, the history of the Labour Party is for another time. But Ramsay MacDonald legitimised the Soviet Union. That's like the major thing that he pulled off. Because at that time, obviously the British Empire, we ruled the world, we had an immense amount of wealth and power, and we had not accepted the existence of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was at that time regarded as being a terrorist state like ISIS. Like we had not recognized it. We had not accepted diplomats. We had not done whatever needs to be done, right? Because they just killed the Tsar and took over the country and caused so much bloodshed. It was Ramsay MacDonald that recognized the Soviet Union. So there you go, a Scot, a bloody Scot, right? A Gaelic, a Celt, yeah, on board with communism. And what is communism? Oh, let me think. It's anti-British imperialism. That's one way of looking at it. It's anti-British imperialism. Tear down the empire. Right? Right? I'm not wrong, am I? And then, of course, Attlee comes along. Attlee was English, but nonetheless, boom, there goes the British Empire. There goes India. Woodrow Wilson. He was English. Not Woodrow Wilson, I'm sorry. I always get this guy. Harold Wilson. I always get his name mixed up. Harold Wilson. He was English. After Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, born in England, but from Irish ancestors. And look, he gave us the Winter of Discontent. Of course, then Thatcher comes in, and then we get Blair. And Blair was a Scot. Gordon Brown was a Scot. Right? If you watch the satirical British comedy show called The Thick of It, which came out in, I'm just looking at the 2005. It's really good fun, actually. God, man, 20 years old. Oh man, I never watched it at the time, but I watched it recently. It's so funny to see how much the country's changed. I mean, really, like these TV shows, these from the noughties. I mean, the noughties is old now. Let's just put that on the line here. I thought I was old for thinking about the 90s being old. No, the 90s is really, really old. The noughties is old now. The noughties is 20 years old. Right? Get that through your head. I'm just saying, from my perspective. When I was in the 90s, when I was a teenager in the 90s, let's say 1995, whatever, listening to Nirvana and Oasis and The Prodigy and what have you, we used to look back at the 70s like it was just a different world. Okay? The noughties, in comparison to today, is like the 70s. It's like 20 years ago. Different world. In the middle of Tony Blair's revolution, but nonetheless the country's still white. You look at this TV show, The Thick of It, everybody's white, right? It wouldn't happen like that today. You look at The Office, famous TV show, everyone's white. Ah, man, different time. But anyway, if you watch this TV show, The Thick of It, it's very entertaining. I do recommend it. Am I recording? Yes, I am. One of the characters in the show just makes the point that everybody in Tony Blair's government is Scottish. Anyway, point being, Tony Blair was a Scot. And he came down, and what did he push forward? Devolution. Right. First of all, you had the Good Friday Peace Agreement, which ended the Troubles, which that's a whole different subject matter. But I mean, Hitchens isn't happy about it. He says we just gave up the war. But anyway, he ended the Troubles, and we had devolution. So we have a Welsh Parliament now and a Scottish Parliament. We almost lost Scotland, I think, in the 2014 referendum, right? Because of this. So what the point is, my dear friends, we have a Celtic, Gaelic group within the British Isles, which is giving our empire away. Gave away America, gave away Ireland. The Fabian Society and the Labour Party, of course, gave away the British Empire. And Blair came in, almost gave away Scotland and Wales, or at least devolved it. And maybe they'll get rid of it with this administration. We don't know. So we, the English, we went out, we conquered the world, and then we just got repeatedly stabbed in the back by the Scottish, and or the Gaelic people, or the Welsh people, or the Celtic people, and they're just giving away everything. Why? Because they hate us. They're anti-English. They got a chip on their shoulder. They feel like we're the evil oppressors, and so they've been rebelling against us for 1,000 years. Okay, so this is the point. There is an Irish question. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be recognised. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be understood. It's an old history. I was going to go through the history of Ireland. Obviously, I don't have time. 46 minutes. I've taken all of these notes. I've got a long list of notes here, just going through the whole thing. I mean, I'm just not going to be able to talk about this. But essentially, you have the original Irish, okay. Slane Macdella was the first High King of Ireland. So if you don't know, the Irish, they would have their kings crowned on Tara, which is a sacred hill within Ireland. And he had 5 brothers, and he divided the country up between his 5 brothers. And he wasn't actually a Gaelic person. He was a different group, because, again, I'm not going to go into the mythology of Ireland at the moment because it's complicated and I don't know it off the top of my head. But anyway, they conquered the island, divided up into these 5 kingdoms. They were beaten by the Tuatha Dé Danann, which I probably don't know how to pronounce. And then later on, the Gaelic people came, defeated the Tuatha Dé Danann. The Tuatha Dé Danann went in and became the fairies. They went into the other world, right? And the Gaelic people essentially accepted the political structure that had already been established by Slane Macdella. And that was the situation in Ireland. Nobody really knows when this happened. It says on Wikipedia 1748 BC. Okay, but who flipping knows, right? But that was the situation in Ireland all the way up until the well, actually, then what happens, interesting enough, you have, I want to make this really clear, because okay, that was the situation in Ireland. The situation in Britain was that Brutus of Troy came, conquered Britain, and then he had 3 sons, and he divided the country up between his 3 sons. This is why we've got England, Wales, and Scotland. England, Wales, and Scotland were all originally British. Like, they had Britons living in them. But this is the origin of the 3 kingdoms. Most people don't know this because nobody looks at the mythology, because they listen to anthropologists and archaeologists, and these people are boring, and they start from the idea that ancient historians were stupid, and they think they're cleverer than them, and they're horrible, and they're boring. I hate them. I despise them. If you want your people to be inspired, you have to celebrate ancient history and legends, and you have to teach these legends to your children to fire up their imagination. And it doesn't really matter if the legends are true or not, to be honest with you. Like, who cares? This stuff happened thousands of years ago. Does it really matter? No, the stories matter. But archaeologists, they come along and they do their digs, and they're like, no, let's just tear all this up. And now you go on the internet, you got people talking about DNA and Oh God! Oh, did you hear? There's been a recent dig, and it proves like 90% DNA, this, that, admixture, and there was a migration, and it's like so fucking boring. It's boring. It's boring. Stop it. I don't care about. I don't care about any of this shit. We need to celebrate the legends. The legends. Okay, guys. So the legend is Brutus divided up Britain between his three sons. Then, of course, the Romans conquered Britain. The Romans and the conquest of Britain by the Romans was very similar in a way to the conquest of England by the Normans. Okay, because the Britons and the Romans shared an ancestral root in Troy, in the same way that the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans shared an ancestral root in Scandinavia. Okay, very interesting. But anyway, conquered by the Britons, conquered by the Romans. The Romans famously fought the Scottish, but they weren't fighting the Scottish of today. They were fighting the Caledonians, and the Caledonians were Britons. So I want to make that point clear. Okay. Then, of course, the Roman Empire collapses. The Picts come in. They conquer Scotland. They're violent. They're raiding Britain. Vortigern invites Hengist and Horsa over. These are the ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons. They come over from Denmark, right? To defend the British, or defend the Britons, from the Picts. Again, the Picts are up in Scotland, but they're not actually Scottish. So then there's a back and forth. We defeat the Picts, and then a guy in 501 called Fergus More comes from Ireland to Scotland. He lands in Argyll. Argyll in Scots means coast of the Gaelic. You can look this up. It's right next to the Highlands, basically. Okay, the Gaelic coast. So actually, the Anglo-Saxons, that's us, the English, we landed in this country before the bloody Scots did. Let's just get that straight. I have to point this out because I've been saying for some time that we came in to defend the Britons from the Scottish, like a Welsh-British alliance against the Scottish, which is kind of true, but actually no, we came in to defend the Britons from the Picts, who are a different race of people. Anyway, Fergus More comes over from Ireland to Scotland, lands in Argyll. They brought the Stone of Scotland with them, right? The some people say it's Jacob's Stone from the Bible. Some people say it's the Lia Fail, or the Stone of Tara. So the High Kings of Ireland were crowned on the Stone of Tara. This is very interesting because this stone later on gets taken by Edward Longshanks down here, and the Kings of England are crowned on it, and even King Charles was crowned on it, which means that if it is actually from Ireland, technically speaking, King Charles is the High King of Ireland. Alright? Why isn't anybody talking about this? I mean, just to go on a complete tangent, King Charles is also Greek. Why isn't anybody talking about that? I don't know. People just don't think, do they? They don't get their facts straight, you know what I mean? Because they don't read their history, and they're not autistic, and they don't think about this stuff. We're ruled over by a Greek dynasty now. Okay? Right? Just in the same way, after Queen Victoria died, well, Queen Victoria, you know, she married Albert, so the Germans came over, right? Elizabeth married Philip. He was a Greek. We have a Greek dynasty ruling our country now. Nobody seems to be aware of it. It's amazing to me. I don't see anybody talking about it. But anyway. The point I'm making, my dear friends, is I'm just going through some of the mythological foundations of the country. Fergus More came over in 501. He was Gaelic, which means he was Irish, and so he conquered Scotland. He defeated the Picts, conquered Scotland. Scotland became Scotland, right? So that was the situation, and then in In 1155, Pope Adrian the fourth issues, who, by the way, is the only Englishman. This is just so hilarious. The only Englishman to ever be Pope, right? He issues a papal bull called the Laudabilita, whatever that means. Basically, grants the right to Henry II to invade and govern Ireland, to enforce the Gregorian reforms. Okay, so and that is how. Yeah, and then of course Strongbow comes over, conquers Ireland, and that's it. We ended up ruling the Irish, right? And then they rebelled against us, and many of the, and this is really, to be honest with you, just to make the point here, this is really like the root cause of the problem, I think, in that the Normans never fully and properly conquered Ireland. They only ever half conquered it. There were always some parts of the island that were left unconquered, ruled over by Gaelic lords in their castles. And why didn't they conquer Ireland properly? Because they were too busy being entangled in wars in France, essentially. This is like the major problem for us, the English people. We got dragged into all this bullshit in France for 500 years, essentially. 500 years of conflict in France. And so the Norman kings were distracted by this, and so they never consolidated their rule over Ireland. Ireland was just considered to be this backwater. And so what happened is the lords that ruled over Ireland, they became Gaelicized, and they went native. So the country was never properly assimilated. And so you get to the time of Henry VIII, you've got Dublin left under English control, and the rest of the island was beyond the pale. And this phrase that we have, beyond the pale, comes from this. It's the area beyond the wilderness of Ireland. It was just unconquered. And so then, of course, we have the Reformation, and so now there's a double conflict. Now with the Irish, not only do we have this ethnic conflict of Anglo-Saxon versus Gaelic people, now there's an additional conflict of Protestant versus Catholic. And so Henry VIII started doing the plantations. He's like, no, we're going to reconquer Ireland. He did. And they started doing plantations. The first successful one, I think, was under King James again. And they rebelled again. And then, of course, Cromwell goes in and crushes them. And then, of course, William goes in and crushes them. And there's this boo, plantation, pushing the Irish into poverty, enslaving them, trying to get them to convert to the Protestant faith, but they refuse to do it, and they're just treated as second-class citizens, and they're just pummeled again and again and again. And we did a really shit job, I gotta say. We did a shit job of looking after these people and getting these people on our side. I mean, in our defense, throughout that period of history, there was still a titanic struggle of Catholic versus Protestant going on. So they were just always considered to be rebels, potential rebels. And they were rebels. They did constantly rebel against us. And then by the time the Protestant Catholic thing had started to die down, so it wasn't so important anymore, in the 19th century, they came into Parliament, and it was still an issue, but not like it was in previous centuries. But they wanted their independence. Actually, they just wanted an Irish Parliament, but we didn't give it to them. And by the time we did give it to them, they ended up just getting freedom and what have you. But anyway, that is a very, very brief history of the English and the Irish. I took so many notes, but I don't have time to go through it all now. That's an hour. I don't want to speak any more than an hour. But the point I'm trying to get at, my dear friends, is that there is an ongoing struggle between the English and the Gaelic people, and the English and the Britons, or the English and the Celts. There is an ongoing struggle. They don't like us. Scottish people don't like us. Irish people don't like us. Welsh people don't really like us, and for some reason we kind of pretend that they do when actually they don't, and it's just one more enemy. And I don't know, man, I'm just getting old. I'm getting old, and I'm just fed up with people shitting on the English. And I don't care. I don't care if they're German, I don't care if they're American, I don't care if they're Irish or they're Scottish or they're Welsh or who they are, or obviously, like, you know, it's like you wake up to this stuff, okay, you're going about your life, and then you start to notice all these minorities, these ethnic minorities, immigrants coming over, and they're shitting on the English. And you start to think, like, well, why are you here in my fucking country? Like just go back to wherever you came from if you don't like it here. You know what I mean? You notice this, and then so you go to the ethno-nationalists for support, and then you realise that actually even the ethno-nationalists are shitting on the English, because it's all this, oh, Churchill, oh, Dresden, oh, I wish our country was conquered by Germany. It's like, well, what the hell is wrong with you people? You know? So you get fed up with the Germans shitting on the English. You notice the Americans shitting on the English. And then finally you recognise the Irish and the Scots and the Welsh shitting on the English. And I'm just fed up with it. I'm fed up with it. Okay? I will play for my own team. I play for England. That's my team. I'm not going to tolerate any other race or nationality or whatever. I'm not going to tolerate it. Like, that being said, I think that this 1,000-year-old ethnic conflict needs to come to an end. I recommend a peaceful assimilation. I recommend that we just open the doors and we just say, hey guys, we're all English now. Because technically speaking, the English race, we are a Germanic race. We do have our ancestors, obviously, in Denmark. But we did come to this country, and this was a land of the Celts. And we did obviously breed with the locals. Like, I'm without doubt, we've all got Irish mothers somewhere, Irish grandmothers somewhere down the line, right? Irish or Welsh or whatever. I mean, they definitely would breed with the locals. So I think that we are we're not really German, because Germans are quite stoic, quite dull and boring people, humorless. I would say we're more of a halfway line between the Gaelic and the German. And that's what the English race is. The English race is a mixed race. Half Gaelic, half Welsh, and half German, right? It's a mix of all these. Half Celtic, half German, right? We're mixed. And I think once we can establish that and recognize that, then you can tell Scottish people, you can say, look, you're English too. I mean, if you look at Irish history, like there's a lot of English blood. I mean, first of all, there's the Vikings that established Dublin. So there's Scandinavian blood in Ireland. And then, of course, there's the Normans and all those kings who then transformed into the Irish, right? And then, of course, there's a long history of English lords and ladies. So there's a lot of English blood in Ireland. Genetically speaking, they're not really that different to us. There's a lot of Irish here in England. A lot of poor Irish came over here to work in the factories and stuff, and they've basically just assimilated into English culture. So these political divisions are, from an ethnic point of view, I think they're quite false. I don't think ethnically we're that different from each other. I don't think it's really a political thing. And I just think that I think we should all be cheering for the same football team. I really do think it comes down to something as simple as that. Football is the country's favourite sport. We've just had the Euros, and it's a time when the nation comes together like I can't think of any other time. We don't do this as much for, well, what other sport do we do it for? Right? Supporting the English football team is a pillar of English nationalism, essentially. And it's very telling that the Scottish will boo us when we win, right? So we need to support the same football team. So we need, like, we could, Like, you could layer an identity on top of it and say we're all British because we're on the British Isles, and that's essentially what the Victorians attempted with the British Empire. Okay, so we had the Union of Crowns, and the establishment of Great Britain, and that's what they were trying to do. But I don't know, to say your English is more rooty, it's more earthy, it's got more oomph to it. To say you're British, it's like an identity layered on top, but the underlying identity exists. You need everyone to be of the same underlying identity, I think. So you need an Englishification of the British Isles. That's the permanent solution to this problem, in my opinion. And you can say that sounds laughable or impossible. I don't think it is at all. This has been done in many other countries. This has been done in France. This has been done in Turkey. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, there was a Turkification under Ataturk. So this is a historical thing that nations have done over the last few hundred years. You know, they brought all the ethnicities together and they said, look, we're all one people now. And I think this needs to be done. I think Scotland as a country needs to be eliminated, basically. Divided up into shires. Okay? Same with Wales. And same with Northern Ireland. And ultimately, need to sponsor some kind of political party in Ireland which brings the Irish back to us. And again, may all sound impossible. I don't know, man. Like, if you can convince these people to join the European Union and say that they're European, why can't you convince them to say that they're English? Or if you can convince these people that you know, a man is a woman and a woman is a man, then you can convince them of anything. It would take time. Obviously, it would take 100 years. But with propaganda and with romances, you know, like you make movies, Scottish girl marries English guy, and this kind of thing, you know. It could happen. And then we will be a united Britain with one ethnicity. And then the war will end. 1,000 years of war. Finished. More than 1,000 years. Finished. Done. Complete. See what I mean? And if we don't do it, then the struggle continues. Because we're divided. We are so divided. And we're just used to it. We're just accustomed to being divided because we've been divided for such a long time. And then we'll just be like Yugoslavia. Just always blowing up and collapsing and blowing up again. And that makes us weaker. So you got to put aside, I mean, like I've said all this stuff about history and legend. It is important, but at the same time, you've got to take the military consideration above everything. From a practical point of view, we don't want our country to be invaded, and the best way to do that is to be united as one country. So that's what we need to do. That in my opinion is the ultimate solution to all of this. Of course, that's a big goal, isn't it? Right? But I don't know. What else do you want to do? I mean, the other solution is wage war against Scotland, kick all the Scottish out. Wage war against Ireland and Wales, just kick them all out. There's not that many of them. We outnumber them, don't we? How many Scots? Like 4 million, 6 million Irish, 1 million Welsh, 2 million Welsh. So we just kick them all out, send them all to America. And then we could do that, right? It's not impossible. But then they're just going to hate us. They're going to hate us. And the Americans already hate us, but they'll hate us even more. And that will last for hundreds of years. So, make love, not war. Yeah? Every English man should get an Irish girlfriend, and that'll solve the problem. Alright? Alright, guys. Thanks for listening. God bless. Goodbye.